You know, it's like you are aggressively downloading these brand new success apps onto basically a 10-year-old operating system. And then you wonder why your brain keeps crashing by Wednesday.
Right, yeah.
Think about it. You decide to completely turn your life around, right? So you try to force all these new habits. You set your alarm for 5 a.m. You buy this really expensive planner. You start taking cold showers.
Yeah, classic cold plunges.
Exactly. You're running all these high-intensity background applications, but you haven't actually upgraded the underlying operating system. So what happens? Your battery, which is your willpower, is just completely drained by 9 a.m.
It is, it's the absolute definition of treating the symptom instead of the underlying disease. We are so obsessed with the visible actions, but we completely ignore the invisible architecture that actually makes those actions possible in the first place.
Welcome in, everyone. Today is Monday, March 23rd, 2026, and we are embarking on a mission that is tailored specifically for you. We know you are here because you want thorough knowledge without the overwhelm. You want the actual signal through all the noise.
Definitely.
So today we are stripping away all that fluffy motivational advice. You know, the kind that makes you feel invincible for a weekend and then just completely fades by Monday morning. Instead, we are decoding the actual systemic frameworks that compound into long-term wealth, health, and mastery.
Yeah, the stuff that actually lasts.
Exactly. We're pulling from some incredibly dense, paradigm-shifting source material today, specifically excerpts from the 2025 book Success Strategies, Things They Don't Teach You at School by Alen Brbutovic. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to truly upgrade that mental operating system you mentioned, we first have to understand the 3 distinct layers of success that the author outlines. Layer 1 is tactics and actions.
Right.
This is the visible stuff we just talked about, right? The cold showers, the journaling, the specific diet plans you see online. Layer 2 is systems and processes. These are your daily routines, your actual physical environment, and the feedback loops that dictate whether those layer 1 tactics actually stick.
Right, the structure around the actions.
Exactly. But at the very bottom, the thing generating everything else is layer 3, which is principles and thinking. This is your mental model of reality. It's how you actually understand cause and effect in the world.
Which means if you try to change your life at layer 1, like just adding a habit, without touching layer 3, failure is essentially just a mathematical certainty. You are relying entirely on motivation. And I mean, motivation is just an emotion. It's fleeting.
It really is. And this brings us to a really critical distinction the text makes. It compares event thinking versus systems thinking.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, so most people are completely trapped in event thinking. Let's say someone looks at the scale and realizes they've gained 20 pounds. They view that as an isolated negative event. So their solution is to create another event. They say, I'm starting a crash diet on Monday.
Which never works.
Right. But a systems thinker looks at that exact same 20 pounds and sees it as the perfectly logical output of a system. They look at their daily habits, the food they keep in their pantry, their stress levels, their sleep schedule.
They see the whole picture.
Exactly. They realize the weight isn't actually the problem. It's just a symptom of a perfectly functioning system that is designed to create weight gain. To fix it, you don't need a dietary event. You have to redesign the root system.
But redesigning that system requires a completely different way of processing information, doesn't it? I mean, the text spends a lot of time contrasting analogical reasoning with first principles thinking.
It does, and that distinction is absolutely vital. You see, our brains naturally default to analogical reasoning because, well, from an evolutionary standpoint, it is incredibly calorie efficient.
It's just easier.
Yeah, it's lazy. We look at what everyone else is doing, and we copy it with slight variations. We reason by analogy. Like an entrepreneur might say, everyone in my industry charges $50 an hour, so I will charge $45 to be competitive.
Right.
It's fast, it feels safe, but it keeps you permanently trapped in the existing paradigm. True breakthroughs require you to burn those cognitive calories and actually use first principles thinking.
I want to make sure I am really grasping the mechanism of first principles here. How do we actually do that in practice?
So the book uses Elon Musk and the early days of SpaceX as the masterclass example for this. When Musk decided he wanted to send rockets to Mars, he looked at the aerospace industry. And the established players basically told him rockets were astronomically expensive and, you know, that was just the reality of space travel.
Which is analogical reasoning.
Exactly, accepting the premise because everyone else accepts it. But Musk rejected that. He used first principles, which means boiling a situation down to its absolute, unquestionable, fundamental truths. He asked, What is a rocket actually made of?
Like literally the materials.
Yeah, aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, carbon fiber. Then he asked, what is the value of those specific materials on the commodity spot market?
He looked at the raw ingredients?
He looked at the raw ingredients and he realized the material cost of a rocket was only about 2% of the typical price the industry was charging.
Wow. 2%.
Just 2%. The other 98% was just bloated processes, outdated manufacturing, and accepted industry dogma. By stripping away all the analogies and building up from the physical truths, SpaceX was able to reduce launch costs by a staggering factor of 10.
That's insane. So first principles thinking is essentially just refusing to accept, because that's how it's always been done, as a valid piece of data.
What's fascinating here is how our brains naturally default to analogical reasoning because it's efficient, but true breakthroughs only happen when we slow down and use first principles.
Right.
But applying that level of rigorous thought requires something the human brain fiercely resists, which is delayed gratification.
Oh, right, because first principles thinking is way slower.
Much slower. It takes significant upfront effort before you see any reward. The author ties this back to that famous Stanford marshmallow experiment from the 1960s. You know, the one researchers put young children in a room with a single marshmallow.
Yeah, the classic test.
Right. They told the kids they could eat it right then. Or if they waited 15 minutes alone in the room, they would be rewarded with a second marshmallow.
The ultimate test of short-term pleasure versus long-term reward.
And the longitudinal data on that was just staggering. When researchers followed those children for decades, the ones who were able to delay gratification, the ones who waited for the second marshmallow, had measurably higher SAT scores, lower levels of substance abuse, better incomes, and even lower rates of obesity.
That's wild, just from waiting for a marshmallow.
Well, it illustrates a cognitive bias called hyperbolic discounting. We are hardwired to overvalue a guaranteed tiny reward today and heavily discount a massive reward in the future. Upgrading your operating system means actively fighting that biological programming.
Okay, let's pivot to how we actually power this newly upgraded operating system because, I mean, what you were describing, fighting biological programming, delaying gratification, constantly analyzing the root cause of systems, it sounds exhausting. If we have to rely on sheer willpower to do that every single day, we are going to burn out.
Oh, we will absolutely burn out. Willpower is a completely finite resource. Every single decision you make, from like what shirt to wear to whether you should check your email, drains that battery.
Right.
If you rely on willpower to resist the junk food in your kitchen, your tank will be completely empty by the time you actually need to do deep work. The text makes a brilliant counterintuitive argument here. It says discipline is not willpower. Discipline is design.
Meaning you architect your environment so that the good behavior becomes the path of least resistance.
Yes. You eliminate the need for a decision entirely. You don't use willpower to avoid eating cookies. You design an environment where there are literally no cookies in the house.
Makes sense.
You don't use willpower to focus on writing. You use software to block the internet on your computer for 2 hours. You're essentially designing a system where failure actually requires more effort than success.
That reframes motivation entirely. I mean, we are usually told to wait for inspiration to strike, but if we are designing our environment to force action, where does motivation even fit in?
Well, the author explicitly flips the cultural narrative on motivation. Most people believe motivation leads to action. You know, you feel inspired, so you go to the gym.
Yeah, that's what we're all taught.
But motivation is entirely unreliable. The reality is that motivation follows action. You use your design discipline to simply start a task, even if you only commit to doing it for 5 minutes. The friction of starting is always the highest point of resistance.
Just getting off the couch is the hardest part.
Exactly. Once you take that action, you create momentum. And that momentum generates the psychological motivation to keep going. Action is the spark. Motivation is just the fire that catches afterward.
I love that concept. But even if we are taking action, we live in an era of infinite choices. How do we decide what actions are actually worth taking in the first place?
The source material addresses this through a framework attributed to Warren Buffett. It's often called the 25-to-5 rule. It is just a ruthless masterclass in elite focus. You sit down and write out a list of your top 25 career or life goals. Then you force yourself to circle only the top 5.
Okay, I can hear the listener getting anxious about this right now. What happens to the other 20 goals? Do those just become your weekend projects or the things you get to when you have free time?
That is exactly what most people think, and it is exactly why they fail to achieve mastery. Those 20 uncircled items do not become your get-to-it-later list. They become your avoid at all costs list.
Avoid at all costs. But these are things you genuinely care about.
That is what makes them so dangerous.
Yeah.
Distractions are just things you hate doing. The most dangerous distractions are the things you care about just enough to sink precious hours into, but not enough to actually become a lead at.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they dilute your focus. Elimination is the absolute core of strategy, and this ties directly into another major concept from the book, which is energy management over time management.
Let's dive into that because we constantly hear about time blocking and calendar hacks, but time is irrelevant if you are staring at a screen like a zombie.
Exactly. You can have 4 uninterrupted hours, but if your energy is depleted, the output will be 0. The text breaks energy down into 4 distinct dimensions that require active management. First is physical energy, which is your baseline. Your sleep hygiene, your nutrition, your movement. If the physical machinery is broken, nothing else runs.
Makes total sense.
Second is mental energy, which is really about managing cognitive load. It involves scheduling deep work blocks when your brain is sharpest and avoiding task switching, which, by the way, absolutely destroys mental stamina.
So physical is the fuel and mental is how you focus it. What are the other two?
Third is emotional energy. This is about regulating your reactivity, setting strict boundaries with people who drain you, and cultivating relationships that actually recharge you. And finally, spiritual energy. This doesn't necessarily mean religion. It means alignment with your core values. Doing work that you find intrinsically meaningful provides a deep reservoir of spiritual energy that can sustain you through massive friction.
But wait, what about the days when you are just completely emotionally drained? How does a system fix that? You can optimize your sleep and block your calendars and align with your values. But what about when you are hit with a crisis? A client yells at you, or you get terrible personal news, and you are completely emotionally hijacked. You can't just design your way out of a physiological stress response.
That is a very real challenge, and the author doesn't pretend we can just completely eliminate stress. Instead, he introduces the concept of stress inoculation training.
Okay, what's that?
It's about expanding your neurological capacity to process stress so it doesn't derail your systems. When you experience a spike in anxiety or anger, your amygdala literally hijacks your brain. And your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical systems thinking part of your brain, shuts down. To get it back online, you have to use a physiological override. The text specifically highlights a technique used by Navy SEALs called box breathing.
I've heard of this. It's a specific breathing pattern, right?
Yes. You inhale deeply for 4 seconds, you hold that breath for 4 seconds, you exhale smoothly for 4 seconds, and you hold your lungs empty for 4 seconds.
Just a continuous box.
Right. You repeat that cycle for 2 minutes. It is not just a cheap relaxation trick. It is a biological mechanism that forces the activation of your parasympathetic nervous system. It lowers your heart rate and signals to your brain that you are actually safe, which brings your prefrontal cortex back online so you can actually use the mental frameworks we've been discussing.
Wow. Okay, so we have upgraded our mental operating system. We understand how to design discipline to conserve willpower, and we know how to manage and regulate our energy. But we still need a destination. I mean, being highly efficient at climbing the wrong mountain is a tragedy. How do we ensure we are pointing this engine in the right direction?
The first step is shattering one of the most pervasive cultural myths of our generation, the idea that you should, quote-unquote, follow your passion. The book argues that this advice is not just unhelpful, it is actively dangerous.
We are told from childhood that if we just discover our passion, the money and the success will naturally follow.
But the text asserts that passion is a result, not a prerequisite. Passion follows competence. When you start something new, you usually aren't very good at it, so you aren't passionate about it. You develop passion after you have put in the grueling hours to achieve mastery, and you begin to see the tangible value you are actually providing to others.
If we aren't following our passion, what metric are we using to choose a path?
The author provides a framework called the convergence method. True direction is found at the intersection of 3 overlapping circles. Circle 1 is your skills, what you're naturally proficient at, or what you have the capacity to become highly competent in.
Okay.
Circle 2 is your interest, what you possess a sustained curiosity for, which is crucial because curiosity is what will push you through the boring, repetitive stages of mastery. And circle 3 is market demand, what other people actually value enough to pay for.
So if you have skills and interests but zero market demand, you don't have a career. You just have a very fulfilling hobby.
Exactly. And conversely, if you have skills and market demand but absolutely no interest, you have a recipe for severe burnout. You need all 3 to converge. But defining what you want is really only half the battle. The text emphasizes that it is equally important to define what you absolutely do not want through the concept of anti-goals.
Anti-goals. So instead of visualizing the corner office, you are explicitly defining the pain points you refuse to accept.
Right. You define the outcomes, the behaviors, and the specific environments you're committed to avoiding. You might say, I will not work in an industry that requires me to travel more than 4 days a month. Or I will not partner with people who require constant micromanagement.
That makes decisions so much easier.
It does. And goals provide incredible clarity through negation. When a lucrative new opportunity presents itself, you don't have to agonize over the decision. You simply run it against your list of anti-goals. If it violates one, the answer is an immediate no.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the convergence method is putting the specific destination address into your life's GPS, anti-goals are the settings that tell the GPS to actively avoid toll roads, avoid traffic jams, and route you around bad neighborhoods. You are defining the exact parameters of the journey.
That is a perfect analogy for how they function together.
Right.
But even with a mapped-out route, you still need a sustainable way to travel it. You need a realistic way to execute for years without quitting. This brings us to what the author calls the consistency engine.
Which means we need to talk about the trap of intensity. Our culture just loves intensity. We glorify the 80-hour work week, the 30-day extreme fitness challenge, the weekend hackathon.
Oh, absolutely. It looks great on social media.
Right. And it feels incredibly productive in the moment. But intensity almost always leads to a boom and bust cycle. You sprint as hard as you can, you collapse from exhaustion, you spend weeks recovering, and then you try to sprint again. Consistency is really the only thing that actually allows the compound effect to work.
And to achieve that unbreakable consistency, the book introduces a strategy called minimum viable effort. The concept is to set a daily execution target that is so embarrassingly small, so ridiculously easy, that you can accomplish it even on your absolute worst, most emotionally drained days.
I know what you're thinking as you listen to this. Doing 10 push-ups or reading 2 pages of a book or writing 50 words of code feels entirely pointless. It feels like a drop in the bucket that won't actually move the needle on a massive goal.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the brilliance of minimum viable effort becomes clear through pure mathematics. The reason this strategy drastically increases your total output over a year is because it completely eliminates 0 days.
0 days being days you do nothing.
Right. The mathematical reality of compounding requires an uninterrupted chain of execution. Every time you have a 0 day, a day where you do absolutely nothing toward your goal, you break the chain, and the compounding effect resets. By ensuring you always hit that tiny minimum threshold, you keep the math working in your favor.
It's not about the 50 words you wrote, it's about the fact that you kept the chain alive for tomorrow.
Precisely. And the secondary benefit is deeply psychological. It shifts you into a state of identity-based persistence. You stop looking at your goals as external things to achieve. You stop saying, I want to write a book. You start saying, I am a writer.
That's a huge shift.
It is, because a writer is simply someone who writes every day, even if it is only 50 words. Identity drives behavior far more powerfully than any external reward ever could.
Because humans will do almost anything to act in alignment with how they view themselves. You aren't forcing a behavior anymore, you are just being who you are.
Exactly.
And to protect that new identity, the author stresses the importance of making 5-year commitments in a 5-minute world. We live in an era that is completely obsessed with the rapid pivot. If a project doesn't go viral in a month, we just abandon it.
Yeah, we give up so fast.
But by committing to a path for 5 full years, you completely eliminate the daily, agonizing decision of whether you should quit when progress feels slow. You already made the decision. Now your only job is execution.
And when you consistently execute that minimum viable effort, applying it to your converged skills over a 5-year period, you eventually reach the ultimate payoff. Which brings us to the final section of our deep dive: financial mastery, skill stacking, and leverage. Because ultimately, all this mental architecture and discipline needs to translate into outsized market value.
And the text makes it very clear, generating high income is not about working harder or sweating more than the next person. It is about creating disproportionate, irreplaceable value.
Which is where the skill stack advantage comes in. The author uses a fantastic example here. Scott Adams, the creator of the globally syndicated Dilbert comic strip.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah, so Adams openly admits he is not the greatest artist in the world. He's not the funniest comedian in the world. And he's certainly not the greatest business writer. But He is in the top 25% of all three of those distinct categories.
Right.
When he stacked them together, above average drawing, above average humor, and above average corporate business experience, he created a combination that literally no one else had. He became a category of one.
It's basically a risk mitigation strategy. Trying to be the top 1% in a single highly competitive field like basketball or acting is a statistical nightmare. But becoming top 25% in three complementary skills makes you a unicorn.
And once you build that unique skill stack, you have to apply it using the value creation formula. The text defines value as an equation. The magnitude of the problem you solve, multiplied by the number of people you solve it for, multiplied by the superiority of your solution over the alternatives, multiplied by the value you actually capture.
Let's break down how that multiplication actually works, because if any of those variables are zero, the whole equation is zero.
Exactly. If you solve a massive high-magnitude problem, but you only solve it for one person, you're essentially just a high-paid consultant. Your scale is limited. If you solve a tiny, low-magnitude problem for 10 million people, you might have a cheap, mildly successful smartphone app. You have to multiply the magnitude by the scale.
And the value captured.
That last variable, the value captured, is the trap. You could use your unique skill stack to generate $10 million in new revenue for your employer, but if you don't have the negotiation skills or the ownership equity to capture that value, you might only see a 3% bonus.
Which segues perfectly into how we actually scale that formula without working 150 hours a week. We have to talk about the leverage hierarchy.
The author categorizes leverage into 4 tiers. At the bottom is labor. This is hiring other people to do work for you. It is the oldest form of leverage, but it scales linearly and comes with massive management overhead and friction.
Right, managing people is hard.
One step up is capital. This is using money to make more money, like investing in assets or machinery. It scales better than labor, but the obvious barrier is that you need a significant amount of money to actually start.
But the top 2 tiers completely change the rules of the game.
Yes. The highest, most wealth-generating forms of leverage available today are media and code.
Because they have infinite scale with zero marginal cost of reproduction.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanism. If you write a piece of software, which is code, or you record a podcast or write a book, which is media, you put the effort in once. It costs you the exact same amount of time and energy whether one person downloads it or 100 million people download it.
That's the beauty of it.
Furthermore, media and code are permissionless. You don't need anyone's capital to write a blog post, and you don't need to manage a team of labor to deploy a piece of code. They work for you 24 hours a day while you sleep, compounding your value globally.
So what does this all mean? It means the ultimate goal of upgrading your operating system isn't just to become a more productive worker bee. The goal is to build a unique skill stack, point it at a high-magnitude problem, and use the infinite leverage of media or code to scale your solution to the world. You want to become a monopoly of one where you are mathematically impossible to replace.
This raises an important question, and it's a challenge to you, the listener. If you audit your daily tasks through the lens of the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, are you actually spending 80% of your time on the 20% of tasks that create true leverage?
That's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. Are you building code, creating media, or expanding your skill stack? Or are you caught up in the low-leverage operational overhead, spinning your wheels on emails and meetings that don't scale? Most people find they have the equation completely backward. They're spending all their time on things that will never compound.
It is a sobering audit to run on yourself. Let's take a breath and recap the massive architectural shift we just walked through. We started by ripping out the old mental OS, shifting away from reactive event thinking and toward first principles and delayed gratification.
Yeah.
Then we stopped relying on the depleting battery of willpower and built a discipline architecture that forces action so motivation can actually follow. We found our true direction through the convergence of skills, interest, and market demand, and we protected that route with rigid anti-goals.
Right.
We powered the whole journey with a consistency engine built on minimum viable effort to ensure we never have a zero day. And finally, we learned how to scale our impact using skill stacking and the infinite leverage of media and code.
It is critical to remember that this is not a buffet where you pick and choose 1 or 2 ideas. It is an integrated, sequential system. The leverage won't work if the consistency engine is broken. And the consistency engine will fail if the underlying mental principles aren't upgraded first.
The layers have to build on each other. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought built directly on the source material's concept of identity-based persistence and what the author calls the mental simulator. We established that every single action you take is essentially a vote for the type of person you are becoming.
Hmm.
I want you to look back at the last 24 hours of your life. Every decision you made, every distraction you gave into, every tiny effort you put forward. If you took those exact 24 hours and ran them through a mental simulator on a continuous loop for the next 10 years, who does the simulator say you are at the end of that decade? And more importantly, is that the identity you actually want to meet?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Mhm.
Keep questioning your assumptions, keep optimizing your systems, and keep upgrading your operating system.
We will see you next time.